Yeah, hey. Oh, yeah.
I always get that last movement, the beat, the last one of your dance. So, good morning, Timothy, and good morning, everybody, to everybody who is listening to us in Clubhouse or watching us on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. It's a pleasure to have you with us all. Once again, it is Sunday morning, 8:21 already, or 8:22, and we're broadcasting from two different locations. That's Timothy in Katsuyama and me in Tokyo. So, good morning, Timothy. And what are we going to hear about today?
Good morning, Maya, and welcome everybody. Today is March 9th, 2025. This is episode 213, Maya.
It is indeed, and we're steadily moving on to the 5th year anniversary, even though it is still several months away from us.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody in the audience, for the encouragement and the support you've given to us. The yen closed out at 148.02 to the dollar on Friday. This is amazing, the strengthening of the yen in light of everything else that is going on. There are a couple of reasons why that's happening. One is the tariffs and the controversy within the American administration and trade with China, Korea, Canada, Mexico, that sort of thing that's going on. And that volatility, the concerns of the U.S. economic growth going on, and the further strengthening is expected going forward. So we have been in the 150, almost the 160 range for several months. So going into 148 is rather significant. We got to keep our eye on that because it is a temperature read for what's going on in the Japanese economy. This week, Maya, the foreign minister of Mongolia visited Japan. You remember we saw the flags flying. It's somewhat rare for a state visit by a foreign minister, but this is the first time the foreign minister from Mongolia has visited Japan in 13 years. So it is a pretty big deal. You might have noticed some advertisements or maybe some special programs on TV featuring Mongolia, and that's the reason why. So it was a pretty big deal. The foreign minister from the UK, together with his defense counterpart, had a 2-on-2 in Tokyo this last week too. Let me see. This is the first time that they've had a 2+2 here in Tokyo. So business and trade is beginning to really start to strengthen between these two countries. There's a lot going on there. As you know, they're co-developing with Italy the advanced jet fighter, but they have signed agreements this last week for trade partnership to 27 billion pounds annually. That equates to, my gosh, it's a big number, 5 trillion yen, or $334 billion annually, trade between Japan and Britain. This is a huge deal. There's a lot of things going on. You might have seen that TSMC decided they're going to spend $100 billion in the United States. So there's a lot of flux. There's a lot of volatility that's going on in the markets, and Japan is not escaping from it. There's a lot going on there. You might have recalled that Mr. Tamaki Yuichiro, came back from the wilderness. He was asked to leave the leadership of the Democratic Party for the People 3 months ago because of some sort of sexual innuendos going on in the background, and to take the heat off of him. This was right after the Democratic Party for the People did surprisingly well in the election. He was hailed as the hero, and then it wasn't Bunshun, but it was another weekly rag that reported on him. Then Bunshun showed up, and he had to step back and let his lieutenant leader take the charge while he stepped out for 3 months. He came back into his position on March 2nd, and things really started to take a different bend there now. As you know, the budget passed on Tuesday. We're going to get into that a little bit deeper. Donald Trump reflects a little bit on Japan. We knew it's coming. At some point in time, he was going to turn his attention to Japan. It happened this week. He's beginning to question, the relationship between Japan and the United States in terms of defense posture, defense responsibilities. He's stroking his chin and wondering how this is completely fair to the United States. This is an issue that people like those of us in the audience have been talking about with Article 9 and how it prevents Japan from doing certain things. And maybe the United States has to double down on some of those issues. So that's an interesting feature. And also he remarked on the volatility of the currency exchange and that Japan is manipulating it. And this is something that we've been following and we kind of all know it, but he really called it to the forefront. And so I think there's some discussion going on there. In fact, all the countries are manipulating their currencies in any event. And let me see, March 4th, the budget passed. The lower house, it's the first time in 29 years that the budget was revised from the original proposal submitted by the LDP. You'll remember we had the extraordinary diet session last year, and when that finished, the LDP submitted their budget before the end of the year, and that's the document that we've been discussing for these last 3 months. It needs to pass the upper house by the end of this month, March 31st, in order to become law. It has to pass the lower house by March 2nd. It didn't, because March 2nd was last week. We were talking on this show. They hadn't passed it yet. They passed it on Tuesday, but it's the first time for it to be submitted in a revised way. And that's the first time in 29 years. And it's the first time in 70 years that the budget has reduced its spending. So that's rather significant too. We're going to get into the hows and whys and some of the other details as we get into the beef and bones of this briefing, Mai, but let me turn it back over to you. I love it when you're on mute.
Whew. Okay, thank you. And thank you very much. Yes, I always forget that I'm on mute. All right, so I really want to say once again thank you to our first sponsor today, that is Kanchu or Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku, and James Howell, who represents the company also along his Japanese colleagues. I want to say that if you haven't worked with James, you certainly need to try that, because we have been really happy to actually talk with him and see what their services are. James will hear you out, and also they will adjust or customize their services to your needs. The company does buying and selling real estate in Yokohama. They do real estate investment and property management. You can find them online, and you can also reach out to James at james@kanchu.com, or just connect with James on LinkedIn. James is quite active there, so if you are on LinkedIn, do not hesitate to reach out to him, James Howell, for you in Japanese or in English. And Timothy, yes, thank you so very much for letting us know what is going on. And I cannot wait to get into the hows and whys, as you said, right?
Thank you
Of
very
all
much.
the Japanese politics. Now it's over to you again.
Thank you. So we ended last week talking just very briefly about this explosive interview, or this meeting with Mr. Zelensky and Donald Trump in the Oval Office. That happened on Friday. It hit the global press. It was a striking news throughout the globe. And then on Monday, people began to talk about it. The Prime Minister mentioned it, and the Foreign Minister mentioned it on Tuesday or Wednesday when he was in his 2+2 meeting with his British counterparts. That means the Foreign Minister of Japan, Mr. Iwaya, met with the British Foreign Secretary, and also the defense ministers met. So this posture of Japan, what are you doing with regard to Ukraine? What is Japan's position here, really comes at the forefront. You remember we reported last week that in Johannesburg, the Foreign Minister of Japan also reiterated Japan's former stance in Ukraine. And although there are things going on in Washington, D.C., and as we all know, when the United States sneezes, Japan catches a cold. So with regard to foreign policy and global diplomacy, Japan is pretty much in lockstep with the United States. But with the volatility that's going on right now with the new Trump administration, Japan is left somewhat left-footed and trying to catch up with things that are going on. In fact, we all are. Every news cycle is dominated by what's going on in the new White House and all of the changes that are going on there and adapting to those. So I think the current stance right now is Japan still supports Ukraine, as does England. Mr. Zelensky left the Washington, D.C. last week on Friday. He went immediately to Europe and had several meetings there. So there's a little bit of difference going on there, but it does impact what's going on here in Japan. And I think that's one of the reasons why the yen strengthened so much. And the Bank of Japan also said, expect further strengthening of the yen. Donald Trump's comments on Friday were that he's beginning to rethink the strategy of the United States and Japan and the relationship with defense spending. The current candidate for the Deputy Secretary for Defense is undergoing hearings now for confirmation. And he also mentioned he reiterated what Donald Trump said, is that Japan should not be spending 2% of their GDP on defense. They should be spending 3% because they're in such a volatile region. The United States is spending enormous amounts of money to support them. And Japan is already in year 3 of a 5-year plan to spend 2% of their GDP. This is a huge number. Let me see, it's 43 trillion yen over a 5-year plan. That's 315 billion US dollars over 5 years. We're a little bit more than halfway through it now. But the Undersecretary for Defense, Mr. Colby, was testifying his desire to see Japan go up to 3%. So it does rattle some cages here in Japan, because even Prime Minister Ishiba said, we're the ones that are going to decide how much we spend on defense. And Mr. Hayashi, the Chief Cabinet Secretary, reiterated that on Friday. He said, it's not just the amount of money or the number compared to the GDP, but it's the quality and the character of the resources that are being contributed to the relationship. So under the Status of Forces Agreement, everybody knows Japan is sponsoring and supporting a lot of the stationing of U.S. forces throughout the country, primarily in Okinawa. So a lot of the salaries, the housing, fuel costs, that sort of thing, are supported by Japanese taxpayers. So it's not completely on the U.S. nickel, but it's somewhat characteristic of a lot of changes that are going on, not just diplomacy, but also in economy, in finance, in currency, and that sort of thing. We are in a state of tremendous flux, and that is really the main point of my conversation today with you, is that Japan too is going through its own reevaluation of what it means to be the party in power, what the LDP means. The LDP Komeito relationship is going through its own rethink right now, very seriously as well. We have an upper house election that's coming up in June. It will culminate probably in a vote in July, because it takes about 15 days for the campaign to start. This diet session ends on June 20th. I think it's the 20th. But in any event, it's in mid-June. And when the diet ends, then preparation goes for the upper house election. The upper house election is stated in the Constitution. It must happen. 50% of the upper house must go for election. Their 6-year term comes to an end. And one of the attractions of this particular timing is that the lower house could also have an election if called upon by the prime minister or by a vote of no confidence. Thank you, Tony. Tony just gave me a cup of hot coffee.
How nice. Great. Yes.
So, this upper house election is really the next key point. We have been talking endlessly for the last 4 months about passing the budget. The prime minister needs to pass the budget. He needs to form some sort of a relationship with one of the opposition parties in order to do that. And he needs to have a meeting with Donald Trump, and he needs to have a nice, bromanship kind of moment. And he needs to come back to Japan and say, I have a relationship with the president of the United States, and we're going to be moving forward. The third thing he needs to do is prepare for the upper house election. So we've passed those two. He has met with the president of the United States. He's passed the budget successfully. He had a coalition with Isshin no Kai. Isshin no Kai holds 38 members of the lower house. The prime minister needs 13 additional votes between the LDP and Komeito. They don't have enough to pass the budget. So this whole controversy going back and forth, he was on base with the Constitutional Democratic Party, who submitted in contravention of the LDP's proposed budget. They proposed their own budget and were negotiating off of that. They came very close to securing that, accommodating the other two opposition parties' demands in that budget. So there was a little bit for everybody there. The Constitutional Democratic Party took the back seat when the Democratic Party for the People, not quite under the leadership of Mr. Tamaki at that point yet, because that only happened last week. They came in very strong with their education and raising the level of the tax-free salaries. Those were their demands. And then Isshin no Kai came in strong at the very end, and they got education and the other demands that they were putting on the prime minister. And they sealed a deal on Monday. It was Monday after this briefing, and the whole house of the lower house came together and voted on it on Tuesday. So it became law on Tuesday. Interestingly enough, let me see, what were the numbers? The budget was 115 trillion yen. That's equivalent to 772 billion US dollars. They passed it with 258 lower house members. Now remember that in the lower house, the LDP and Komeito, their coalition, only has 220 people of the 465. And with Isshin coming in, they eclipsed that and they passed more than 50%. In fact, everybody in Isshin no Kai, the 38 members of Isshin, voted with the LDP and Komeito to pass the budget. So it put the LDP in a good position, but only a temporary position, because this agreement between Isshin no Kai and the LDP is only to pass the budget, and only for those demands that they made. And some of them are still kind of, we're going to work on that. We're going to try and make it so that the high school lunches are completely free by next year. But it's one of those things that they're going to still be working on. So it's a commitment. And the Isshin no Kai and also the Constitutional Democratic Party don't trust the LDP. They have been manipulated and they have been betrayed in the past on certain agreements that they've made. So everybody is very, very tense about the agreement. And that's why it took so long. We went past the deadline. The deadline was Sunday of last week, and it hadn't become, it wasn't passed from the lower house, which requires a whole meeting, a honkaigi in the lower house to pass it, and then it goes to the upper house. And as you know, if you've been watching this briefing regularly, with regard to the budget, the annual budget, the lower house gets the first bite at it. They must chew it up and spit it out and pass it by March 2nd in order to give it to the upper house for 30 days. They need 30 days to consider it. This year they missed that deadline, but and they missed that deadline because they lacked 13 votes. 13 votes between LDP and Komeito to exceed the 50% in order to pass a bill. In 29 years, the the LDP has never had this kind of a situation. So it's a completely new ball game, and it's a new ball game not just for this session but going forward. So the LDP, the 2012 scenario where the LDP basically controls things, with Seiwakai, the former Abe faction, really at the center of LDP politics, that is no longer something we need to consider. It is moving into a completely new realm. So they've passed the budget, but now the gloves are off, and they didn't really blend a long-term strategy with Ishin. Ishin didn't want that. Ishin wants to kick out the LDP, as do all of the opposition parties. So it's just a stopgap to pass the budget. Nobody wanted to be the person blamed for not passing the budget. So even the opposition parties, the Constitutional Democratic Party under Mr. Noda, also kind of backed off a little bit. You remember they backed off a little bit on the insistence that the accountant for the Seiwakai testify in full hearing on sworn testimony with the newspapers and the televisions going forward. They didn't succeed on that, but they did succeed on getting his testimony in a non-disclosed secure location with the full budget committee, 50 members there. And he did testify. It wasn't hugely revealing as expected. It wasn't under sworn testimony, and it wasn't under the prying eyes of the press. So there was some concessions given there. But the LDP is in a position now where it must give concessions throughout and going forward too. So with the budget passed now we come up with the real thorny issues, and the gloves are off with Mr. Tamaki coming in. He took over back the leadership of the Democratic Party for the People on, what was it? I think Tuesday, and immediately began to criticize Ishin. He criticized the LDP. He criticized the budget. And in fact, when the budget came up for a vote, the Constitutional Democratic Party, the largest opposition party, didn't vote for it. So they were still miffed that the LDP sided with Ishin no Kai and not with the Constitutional Democratic Party. So they're in a fighting mood. The Democratic Party for the People under Mr. Tamaki wants to repeat what they did in the last election in October. The October surprise was that the Democratic Party for the People exceeded their vote count from 7 to 28. They grew 250% in that one election. He became a hero until the scandal broke out, but I think that was maybe somewhat by design. I mean, it happens from time to time, but it was curious, the timing there. He had to step out for 3 months, taking a little bit of the thunder away from that emerging party. He has said we want to repeat. So in the upper house election, he wants to increase the number of Democratic Party for the People candidates in the upper house election by 250% too. He wants to repeat that. But also, not only him, but the other opposition parties are hankering for a upper house, lower house dual election. So that is really something that is, I think, coming down the path. Just before this timing comes up in June is the election for Tokyo as well. The Tokyo metropolitan government also goes through their election for the metropolitan seats. And this is a barometer of how the public is feeling. Tokyo doesn't represent all of Japan, but it's a barometer of the issues that confront people. And I mean, 10% of the entire population lives in Tokyo. So what's going on in Tokyo does have an impact. And this election cycle happening just before the upper house is a barometer. And you never know, the lower house election is not scheduled. So it's not, they just had an election. The term of office is 4 years for lower house. They're not scheduled to have another election, but it could be triggered, and pretty quickly too, by a no confidence motion or by the prime minister saying, I'm sick of dealing with you guys. I'm going to close down the house and we're going to go for elections. A pretty big gamble. And I think if you're the prime minister, at the end of the election for the lower house, of the upper house, the LDP now holds the majority of seats with Komeito in the upper house. So that's why the budget passing the lower house Going to the upper house, it's a shoo-in because the LDP and Komeito have a majority of votes there, so they just stamp it through. It will become law. We know it's going to become law already. And even it's somewhat unlikely, but it is possible that the LDP could lose the majority that they hold in the upper house election. But the reality is that in the lower house, the more powerful of the two, they don't have a majority, and they have to go through this excruciating process of just negotiating with people, with the opposition parties, to pass even the simplest of details. And not only that, but everybody distrusts them, so it takes even longer. So the machinery of government is really retarded as a consequence of that. And it looks like that's going to be the flavor going forward, unless they have a lower house election. And I think that that's the gamble that the LDP is willing to take. At the end of the upper house election, the LDP, if it doesn't do anything else, it still has to fight with people because it doesn't have a majority. So one idea is, what the hell? Let's go ahead and call an election anyway, because even if we lose, we're in the same situation. Even if we lose, at least we don't have 13 additional votes that we require in order to bypass everything and be able to dictate how the legislation should move. So I think the possibilities of a lower house election, a double election, are rather high, but we just don't know. There are a couple of issues that are going on right now, bubbling, that indicate what's going on. One of them is the surname for married couples. That's a big issue now. And just to explain a little bit about it, when a couple get married, there's the koseki, the family register. The woman falls into the man's koseki, family register, and she takes on his family name, and then that family name obviously goes to the children as well. The legislation under consideration now is that she can keep her name, and we have to change the koseki system, which has been dominated Japanese society since before the war. I mean, it's an age-old tradition of having a family register. So this is a big deal. Inside the LDP, there are two factions. One is a rather conservative faction, and one is more progressive. And there's a huge fight going on inside the LDP. Once again, this turmoil that we were talking about going on in Japan, going on in the United States, actually going on globally, it is existing here in the LDP too. There's a very strong conservative coalition that says, don't change the family register. If a woman gets married to a man, then she takes the man's name. That's the way it's been. That's the way it should be. We've always, for those of us who have been dealing with Japan, that's a frequent refrain you hear all the time. Don't change it if it's working. So that's one of the issues that's really going to divide not just the LDP, but also coalesce some of the opposition parties. Most of the opposition parties are for the surname change because it's a very popular issue. More than 80% of the Japanese population is in support of it. So it's one of those issues that is likely to come up as a flashpoint. Let me see what else we're going to be talking about. The other thing that is very interesting here, and something that all of us need to become accustomed to, is the LDP no longer holds all the marbles, doesn't hold all the cards, as Donald Trump said last week in his meeting with Zelensky. They don't hold all the cards. For the first time in 29, 30 years, the LDP must negotiate. These guys don't know how to negotiate. They don't have the muscle memory of negotiating with the opposition. So it is very awkward. And it's not something that they're accustomed to. The last time they had to negotiate, I think there are probably 15 people in the lower house in the LDP who were holding their seats when they had to negotiate with the opposition party. I think we all remember that 30 years ago. Now all of the members, most of the members, don't have that experience. They have been a member of the LDP when the LDP had power, and all it had to do was say, this is how we're going to vote. We'll listen to you. We'll pretend like there's a debate, but when it comes down to the wire, we're going to vote LDP and Komeito, and we're going to pass the legislation that we want to pass. And it's a new ball game now, and it's not likely to change. So when we look at the LDP, when we look at Komeito, when we look at the opposition parties, it's really important to reflect on what that looks like. So with regard to the LDP, it is under the leadership of Mr. Ishiba, who is not a very strong leader because he needs to be a negotiator. He maybe with the dynamics in a different situation, maybe he would have been a strong, articulate, dynamic leader like Donald Trump said when they had their meeting. But he doesn't really appear that way. When you see him walking in the halls after a diet hearing or something like that, he does look tired. He looks haggard. He looks overweight. And you've got to admit that it is a tough job. I mean, poor him. But it is a job that the LDP has assumed. So what happens with the LDP as we move into the upper house election, if there is a lower house election, it remains to be seen. But the leadership of Mr. Ishiba, it's probably stable until then. There have been no scandals. Typically, when a new prime minister takes office, somebody in the cabinet is embroiled in some sort of a scandal, and that hasn't happened with the current prime minister, thankfully. So he's had other issues that he's had to deal with. Moving on to Komeito, it's a coalition partner with the LDP. It's been a coalition partner for more than 20 years. The leadership change there has been, they've had 3 leaders over the last 4 months. Unfortunately, the earlier leader resigned after 14 years at the helm. The second leader came in to take over. He was the number 2. They didn't have an election for him. He was just kind of ushered in. And then we had the October election. He lost his election, surprisingly enough. So they brought in another member, Mr. Saito, to take over the leadership. And he is also stroking his chin saying, I wonder if this relationship with LDP is really the right way to go. We are the clean government party. The principles of the religious organization of which we sprouted from. We were the Komeito was the government relations arm of Soka Gakkai, and it became a political party. And the precepts of Soka Gakkai are not being represented in the coalition that we have with the LDP. So something needs to change here. So he's stroking his chin, wondering, are we really representing our core values? That didn't happen for the last 20, 25 years. And now it's going through a rethink. So should this coalition break apart, and there are signs of it, for example, the LDP and Komeito have an agreement. We're going to run a candidate in this election district, and your members are going to vote for it. You're not even going to put a candidate there. And as a consequence of that, in this election district over here, we're not going to put a candidate, and our members, our voters, will vote for your candidate. So therefore, we can maintain some sort of a parity. That election agreement seems to have broken down. And it's broken down in a couple of really obvious ways, in Osaka and in Tokyo. So they have now announced that they're going to run a candidate in one of the districts where the LDP had this agreement. You're not going to run a candidate there because the LDP is going to take this one. You're going to have an election district that we're going to support you. We're not going to run a candidate. More importantly is they were pretty much under an agreement with Isshin no Kai as well in Osaka to do the same thing. That agreement eventually fell apart, and Isshin swept all of the election districts in Osaka, and now there is no Komeito representation in Osaka. Osaka has the municipal government, they have the governor, and they have all of the seats in the lower house. And Komeito is very envious of that because their numbers actually are dropping a little bit, and the number of people in the population that belong to Soka Gakkai are also being squeezed. On the other end of that is Isshin no Kai, which is really beginning to cozy up to the LDP. The LDP is thinking, we've had this relationship with Komeito. They provide 24 members of the lower house for helping us have this coalition. And in the upper house, their votes also help us eclipse the 51%. They don't have enough members in the lower house to help us eclipse. We We need another 13. Ishin, though, has 38 members. And even if Komeito decides that we don't like you anymore, we're going to step out, and the LDP has a coalition with Ishin with those sweet 38 additional votes, now we're back in the game. So there's that calculation that's going on too. And since the LDP was able to pass the budget with Ishin no Kai's help, it looks like there might be some daylight there. The other thing with Ishin no Kai that's very interesting is that until Mr. Baba, you remember Mr. Baba as the leader of Ishin no Kai, as a consequence of the election in October, he resigned, and the governor of Osaka took over the leadership of the party. That's interesting because he's not a member of the Diet. And when they signed this agreement last week about passing the budget, it was the governor showing up to sign this document or to be there with the prime minister and with Komeito to show off that they had reached this alignment and they were going to pass the budget. And it's for people in Nagatacho, it's somewhat concerning that the leader of that political party is not a Diet member, he's a governor. And for him to come up and sign that, it's like, who is this guy? We know he's the governor, but we're not familiar with him. He hasn't been that involved in the negotiations. And with regard to the being involved in the negotiations, the prime minister has been criticized roundly within the LDP that he was somewhat uninvolved in the negotiations. I didn't see much of his involvement either. He mostly relegated it to his lieutenants. So when the deal was finally cut, he was there to sign the documents and get the accolades. But I think it's one of his leadership issues. And once again, if you see him in the press and walking in the halls, he does look a little bit tired and haggard. Let me see. The Constitutional and Democratic Party, the Ishin no Kai, and the Democratic Party for the People, these three opposition parties want to oust the LDP. The LDP, in order to forestall that, needs to form a bond or a coalition with one of them so that it maintains a majority. It's not a majority with Komeito, as we've said endlessly, and it's unlikely to have that. Having a coalition partner with one of them is also unlikely, but you never know. With Ishin, maybe there's some daylight there. You will remember that the prime minister, when he visited with Donald Trump 3 weeks ago, they mentioned the expo, Osaka Expo, which begins in less than 2 months. And that Mr. Trump said, yes, it's very interesting and it would be nice. Yes, thank you for the invitation to show up. It now looks like maybe the vice president will show up and visit the expo, which is a huge boost for Ishin, for the economy there, for the credibility of the expo. And also the date of his visit, the proposed visit, either of the president, but more likely the vice president, falls just before the beginning of the election for the upper house. So all of these things are all, they all make sense in one way or another. And somebody is designing this so that for maximum impact. There's a lot more going on there, and I've gone on really long, and some of it is kind of deep in the weeds. I don't know if it's of great interest or pertinence to everybody, but it is important that you understand that kind of basic foundation. The LDP is no longer in power. Even the LDP Komeito, although they have a majority in the upper house, it doesn't matter. The lower house is where it really makes a difference, and they need to struggle to either define that majority or seek some other alignment that keeps them in the position. The opposition parties, on the other hand, there is a song that's being sung. Together we could defeat them if we coalesced our forces. But I think the difference between the three opposition parties is relatively difficult to overcome. It's more likely that the LDP might have a relationship even without Komeito. They could keep Komeito, but probably Komeito would plug its nose and say, no, we're not going to do that because the seats that we had in Osaka and the Hyogo prefecture were taken away by Ishin, and we don't like them, and we want to reestablish our prominence with the LDP and continue to have a cabinet position. And with the dangling of a cabinet position to Ishin, a lot can happen there. So there's a lot in flux here, and there's a lot of still controversy that's going on. We can talk about that more in the question and answer period. I want to wrap this up with the biggest news of the day, and that is that the Meteorological Agency of Japan has announced, and the cherry blossoms usually follow these rules, that the cherry blossoms will start to pop on March 21st. That is, they announced this on Wednesday, and in the past couple of years, they have been relatively accurate. Last year, it was a little bit off, but the cherry blossoms bloomed maybe 7 days in advance, even of the announcement for the Meteorological Agency. But for those of you who know or live in Japan, you know that there's a map. It's a daily map. They tell you when their cherry blossoms appeared in Okinawa, and as it creeps up the archipelago, it goes all the way up to Hokkaido. It's a daily thing, and we are in March. It's March 9th today, Maya? It's March 9th. March
Yes,
24th,
it is March 9th. Yes.
It's really something to look forward to. And you will begin to feel this vibration throughout all of Japan, and particularly in Tokyo, where business and the tourists are here, this buzz, this anticipation. And I feel it myself, and I'm very much looking forward to it. The seasons will open up, and we can get out of my berth in Katsuyama and actually be on the waves. I don't know how I'm going to be broadcasting our weekly broadcast, because, Saturday and Sunday, I'm usually, being guided by the wind. So let's see how that goes. But Maya, let me turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Timothy. And since you mentioned the cherry blossoms, I think you mentioned your birthday. I want to say something.
But thank you very much. And I got thank you very much for those of you in the audience. March 3rd on Monday was my birthday. I was 37 again. It's getting tiring, but I got lots of accolades and congratulations, slaps on the backs, punches in the face. So thank you very much.
But what a wonderful age, 37. And we've got Ted Gover. Hello, Ted, and thank you for tuning in.
It's 37 too.
Yeah. Happy birthday, belated birthday from earlier this week. Hope all is well. And
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you, Ted, indeed. And thank you to everybody who is coming up with comments and questions to this briefing. Now, before we move to the Q&A, I want to say thank you very much to our other sponsor. And our other sponsor is Houze, or Houze Inc, as they are also known. You can find them online as well. You can connect with them via their website at houze.co.jp, or send them an email to webmaster@houze.co.jp. They also can answer your inquiries and talk with you either in English or Japanese, because Hana Urushizawa Howell is there, and she will do everything possible to customize their services to your questions and your needs. So they do custom home design and construction, also commercial building construction. Do not hesitate to reach out to them. Their contact details are in the description of the video and on YouTube. You can find Hannah also on LinkedIn. And Timothy has been trying to distract me behind the scenes by, gesticulating and saying this and that without, doing that out loud. So thank you.
It's difficult to distract you because I tried really hard.
Well, but thank you for doing that. And no, thank you. So, okay, anyway. Now, we're moving on to the questions and answers here. We've got quite a few of them on LinkedIn, also YouTube, and in Clubhouse as well. I want to start with the very first of them. It came from... okay. Well, one of the first... anyway, it came from Greg Melcher. So, Greg, thank you very much. And, it is about Mr. Trump. How do you think the Trump administration changes the power balance vis-a-vis Taiwan? So, it's not directly related to Japanese politics, but still I think that it is, in a sense, well, it has impact on this because we are in the same region, and we'll see. I think there has been very little actually about Taiwan, with the exception of what you mentioned in the beginning of the briefing, that the Taiwanese chip producer, semiconductor producer has decided to invest into the USA. But what else, or how will the balance be impacted? What do you think, Timothy?
Thanks for the question, Greg. It's always good to hear from you. I'm not so tuned in to U.S. Taiwan, but you've got to imagine that the Taiwanese having this agreement of investing TSMC. What is the number, Maya? Is it 100 billion? It's a
I
huge
think,
number.
yes, it's a huge number. Yes, 100
It's a huge
billion.
number that Taiwan is going to invest in the United States, and you can imagine Donald Trump sitting at the table having this negotiation and saying, look, we're protecting you. We're sending you arms. We're building this coalition. What the hell are you doing for us? You know what? The best thing that you have, and it's the same thing with Ukraine, give us your rare earths. You know, we will have a deal for you, but we want something in exchange. So you've got to imagine that, you know, this investment by TSMC, it's good on two counts. Number one, if in fact China does move kinetically on Taiwan, the projection and the protection of this high state-of-the-art chip manufacturing is distributed. Part of it is distributed to the United States, part of it is distributed to Kumamoto in Japan, but Japan is also in, one could say, harm's way should there be a kinetic action going on there. So there, the Taiwanese are also investing in Japan. Of that relationship, I'm more familiar, but what's going on between the United States and Taiwan is a little bit out of my range. Maybe there's somebody else that's in the audience that can contribute a little bit more richly to that, Maya.
Well, I hope somebody can help us here. Yes, so if you're out there listening to us, please let us know. Leave a comment and help us. So we move also towards Clubhouse now, because there we've got a couple of questions. We've got Hiroku-san and Cam, so thank you very much for listening in there as well. And Hiroku-san, she has a comment and a question to, regarding Ishin in Osaka. So it is like Mr. Yoshimura, about him. Is he seeking support from the LDP for the success of the expo?
Yes.
He has appeared in several media, including one of the most popular TV shows here. They are struggling with ticket sales. So, Timothy, your comment on this?
Oh, absolutely. He's asking everybody to help. All of the companies that are located in Osaka are contributing and trying to drum it up. But yes, if he could get some comment or some push by the foreign ministry or from the prime minister, that's golden for him. The numbers are not really that strong. The delays in the construction, the level of enthusiasm by the contributing countries has not been very high. You know, the World's Trade Fair, it's now called the Expo, is has suffered some in recent years with the burgeoning costs, and it's just a 6-month period where countries come in to showcase their highest value adds and to promote themselves as tourist destinations or as manufacturing or their technical prowess. So it's a great boost for the hosting country if it's a successfully run event. So there are more than 27 million visitors from overseas that are expected there, in addition to the several million, multiple of that, of the Japanese that will be coming in. So it's a huge boost to the Osaka prefecture government, and it's also kind of a reiteration. Ishin is for you. Ishin is your party. We have done this. We have brought this for you. So in the next election, and the expo is occurring at the time that there will be the upper house election and maybe the lower house election as well. So Ishin being prominent in that time frame is critically important. They distinctly want to repeat what the Democratic Party for the People were able to have, but Ishin also, they didn't do very well in the last election, and that's why Mr. Baba was moved out. the Democratic Party for the People, they scored big because they went for younger voters. They hit them with social media, and they appealed to some of the interests that they have about education, about lowering, exceeding the cost of non-tax salaries. So right now, the agreement for the budget was 1.6 million yen. It was at 1.03 million. It's just amazing. That's $6,000 or something like that per year, below which you're not taxed, but above which you are taxed. And now it's almost double that. So they did reach that agreement, but that was appealing to their voting base. And Ishinokai wants to do the same thing. And critical to that, because their center of gravity is the Kansai region, Osaka in particular, and they want to expand that and be a national party. So yes, Ishinokai and Expo are distinctly tied together.
Right. Okay. So thank you for that. And just to piggyback a little bit, you mentioned that Ishin no Kai also, that's the Democratic Party for the People, and the CDP. They all of them want to oust the LDP, and still it's really so difficult for them to come to terms with each other's policies and everything. So it's once again, to me, it looks like the LDP is the winner here. And even though you and also Dan Harada, you mentioned that we live in interesting times in terms of, things that are happening for the first time to the LDP in the Diet and everything. Once again, no party is strong enough to oust the LDP. And even though the coalition of the LDP and Komeito right now is still very weak, they have to negotiate and do this and that, the opposition parties cannot get their act together. Do you suspect that there is something running behind the scenes that actually keeps or helps keep these opposition parties, arguing with each other?
No, I don't think so. I think it's just the dynamic. It's the Japanese culture. It's the Japanese politics. Politics is a perfect reflection of culture and society. And some people might say, well, they're just waiting for a leader to arise. They do have a leader. Mr. Noda used to be prime minister. He was prime minister very briefly. He is a sharp cookie. He is the leader of the Constitutional Democratic Party. And so among the opposition parties, you could hoist your flag and say, yes, we will go with you. But it's just too difficult. Mr. Tamaki believes, and to his credit, I mean, he brought the Democratic Party for the People. Who was talking about them before? They had 7 members before. 7 members of what? The number is, I don't want to get it wrong. 465 members. They had 7, and
Right.
now he's got 28. So that leap, it's not completely him, but he was the leader of the party, so he deserves some of that. Ishin no Kai, they did have Mr. Baba. I liked Mr. Baba a lot. I thought he did a great job. They didn't do well in the election. That's not always his fault, but when somebody, you have to take responsibility and you have to have, attribution for leadership. He was moved out. He's still in Ishin no Kai, but the leadership went not to another member, Mai Hara, but it went to the governor of Osaka, who is one of the foundational members of Ishin no Kai. So, yeah, Ishin and Osaka, there's this dynamic between Osaka and Tokyo, as we all know. And Osaka is always kind of bitter at Tokyo because you guys think you're the smartest and you're the biggest, but, you're just a bunch of pansies, and we in Osaka, we know how to cook and we know how to fight and we know how to sing songs, and all of the comedians in Japan are all from Osaka. So what do you have, right? So there's that dynamic going on too. But it makes Japanese politics interesting. For a lot of people, Japanese politics is boring. It's not moving. But it is very rich. But it does take a little bit of getting into, and I hope our program, Maya, helps people cross that chasm where it becomes interesting. It's a dynamic that to watch because it helps you in your business. It helps you in understanding what's happening in Japan that's important to you.
Yes, and what you could expect eventually, possible scenarios and so on. Okay, and on this we've got also a comment from Manabe-san that Osaka Expo and the Hyogo issue will be factors in voting for Ishin in the coming election. So yeah, yes, right.
And also Manabe-san, thank you very much for that comment. Also, this controversy with the governor of Hyogo continues. There are people that just don't want to let it die. They don't want him to be governor. There's still a scandal that's brewing there, and that's also a bit of a punch in the eye to Ishin. His winning the governorship was the first time for Ishin to expand outside of Osaka. They thought maybe this is a trend. We can go to neighboring prefectures. We can capture some of the seats that are being vacated by LDP members who have been putting money in their pockets. We're going to go in Chiba. We're going to run somebody in Chiba as well. And that's stalled somewhat. So I think there's still a lot of fight left in it.
Right. Yes, Christopher, thank you. Yes, that comment was about the opposition parties. So thank you very much for letting us know that you follow us too. And well, yes, moving to Clubhouse again, Cam. So there is a question there about the budget and how what percentage of the budget in 2025 is dedicated to Social Security. This is the first question. And I can answer this question easily because I have the numbers here. So the budget for 2025 is 115.5 trillion yen, and of this budget, 38.3 trillion is dedicated to Social Security. So this is 33.5% of the total budget. Well, it tells you that one third of the next fiscal year's budget will go to pensions. It will go also to other welfare programs. Which is, I believe, a huge number. And then the follow-up question by Cam is Japan prepared to have its own Dodge in terms or following or based on, let's say, the increasing prices of all the other, components of the budget?
Thank you very much, Cam, for mentioning that. It really indicates you're watching closely what's going on in Japan, and I understand you'll be here this month, so looking forward to catching up with you. Yes, so there is some voices going around. Let's get rid of the finance ministry. Have you heard this one, Maya?
No, I haven't, but I cannot help but laugh. Get rid of the finance.
Let's get rid of the finance ministry. They're just a bunch of bums. They're elevated so high above everybody else. They're dictating to everybody. And I mean, Maya, you've worked in and with the Japanese government. The power of the finance ministry. It is preeminent, and everybody's terrified when they talk to them because they're the ones that sign the bills. And when you have a budget that needs to pass through the finance department, the finance minister is probably. Yeah, he's depending, it used to be Taro Asa for many, many years as the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister. It now is somebody that's still in the faction of Mr. Of Mr. Aso.
Mr. Aso.
And they don't want to release that. But yes, the finance ministry, there is a voice going on now. Let's get rid of these guys. Let's redistribute it. They need to be distributed to other other parts of the Japanese government and made something a little bit more representative and responsive. So that argument has just been coming up. It's been bubbling, Maya, but it is coming up, and it's really interesting. Cam, that you picked that up all the way in Washington, D.C. It is something that's going on. Dodge, I think, is triggering in a lot of different countries this reevaluation of how things were done and why they were done. They were done because it was done before, and that's the way it's done, and the party is still in power, and let's continue to do it this way. In the United States, Donald Trump, I think, is showing us, and it's not some people could say it's based on revenge. It's getting back at people. But the things that he says are things that resonate. It has been going on for a long time. It is rather curious why this money is being spent there, and just opening the books and revealing how some of this money is being spent and letting people come to their own conclusions. But I think it's probably an exercise that a lot of countries should go through. But a country like Japan, and there are other countries similarly situated, they've been in power for such a long period of time, and things get entrenched and the economy gets stuck because of vested interests. And I think you can say that about a lot of countries, but you sure as hell can say it about Japan. The vested interests really dominate how prices and regulation and access is pretty much dictated outside of the bounds of what would logically be the outcome. So yeah, I think it's due to becoming, Cam.
Well, I would argue that there will be a debate. I'm sure that the debate is coming, but I would argue that it will be easy to reduce the number of the people working in Kasumigaseki. And one of the reasons is, once again, as you mentioned earlier, this is the culture here. And the second one is, I believe that there is a lot of power there. And if we have seen some stability in policies and public policies here in Japan, that stability is thanks to and due to basically Kasumigaseki. Because we see that in other countries, especially in the United States and some European countries as well, when the government changes, everything changes, and there is a lot of disruption. There is a period of things coming back to their places and this and that. In Japan, you don't see that, right? And it's all thanks to Kasumigaseki, I believe, because there is a lot of power there. Of course, there are some vested interests there as well, but Japan has enjoyed a relative stability in also in their political life and let's say the government financing of social programs and other programs, thanks to that let's say number of people there in Kasumigaseki. So I don't see it really. I mean, it's easy probably to to up the narrative in the media and say, oh, those bureaucrats, they're doing a terrible job, and they're just sitting there doing nothing, and so on and so on. We saw that after 2011, the earthquake here, the triple disaster. But still, I think that culturally it's really, really difficult to achieve what the United States is doing right now, and maybe we don't want that. Okay.
Well, I think we are in an era of change, and I think the eclipse of the 2012 situation is upon us, and I think it is likely that the LDP could fall out of power in the next election if there's a joint election. And that means, once again, it's not because of revenge, but it kind of is, that there would be a reevaluation. And these fat cats, these LDP fat cats who have been soaking up and getting all the money and all of the contracts and stuff, that'll undergo a reevaluation. So yeah, once again, the United States is setting the tone and is setting a pattern for others to emulate. And I think Japan is coming up on that. So I think the observation from Cam is really on point.
Oh yes, I agree with you. It is on point. There is no doubt there, no mistake. Just my thoughts went into, well, having been observing what happens here in Japan. I'm not sure we're going to see something as radical as what is going on in the United States right now. But we'll see. I may be wrong, and who knows? Yes. All right. So, and then, yes, Manabe-san, thank you. So Manabe-san writes, in Japan, gyokaku is expected by people. So I wonder what gyokaku is, really. I am not sure what it means. Manabe-san, could you please help us a little bit with what you mean by that? So we can, yes, comment on this. And also, I think that you already answered this question, but there is actually a hint or a question by Hiroaki on YouTube about the Osaka Expo, and is Mr. Trump coming to the Expo on for the National Day of the United States?
Yeah.
Right.
I think Cam might have a better beat on that, but from what I've understood, it's probably too big a concession for Trump to visit. That would be a real gift. But the vice president, he could, push it off to the vice president, which would also be very big. It's just, the signals are sent, and these kinds of things are very meaningful. So it is, since the storyline right now is probably not Trump, but maybe Vice President Vance. That story, it's a trial balloon. I think it's going to catch wind and probably, it's too early to say.
Okay, yes. Well, let's see. We'll be following that as well. And yes, I haven't received another comment from Manabe-san, I think, or maybe I have. Let me have a look. And if yes, about the Gyokaku. What is just Gyokaku means the digitalization for promoting paperless processes in government offices at this moment. Okay. Well, thank you, Hiroaki, for helping.
Thank you.
Helping us. Yes. Right. Okay. So yeah, the administrative reform. Okay. Yes, that's what it means. Thank you, Manabe-san. Thank you, Hiroaki.
Okay.
Right. Yes. Yeah, administrative reform. Yeah, I think that we can talk a lot about this, and what Cam's observations and the administrative reform, but it's going to take us probably an hour, or even two, to just outline the tendencies and the trends here. So maybe we can do it bit by bit in other briefings as well. And otherwise, at the moment, it seems that we have gone through all the comments. Timothy, you okay? I can hear some background noise.
My empty can of coffee spilled. So.
Oh, okay. So
no damage.
Okay, no damage. Good. That's good to know. And it also means that you will be free to go. I know that you're eager to have time on your beautiful boat.
You see that I've got my sailing outfit on.
So
I'm
yes.
ready to push off.
Very, very dandy, just. Okay. Well, great. And with this, once again, thanks a lot, Timothy. To everybody who stayed with us, thank you for being with us this morning as well. Remember, Timothy is, the owner of Langley Esquire. That is the oldest government relations agency here in Japan. So if you have friends or colleagues or acquaintances who need to work with the Japanese government in Japan, remember Timothy is your man. And you can easily connect with him on LinkedIn or send him a message via other social media or send him an email as well. So thanks a lot. In the meantime, please follow the Langley Squares newsletter.
Thanks,
so that, yes, you can get the synopsises of these briefings as well, and also information about events and policy briefings as well that Timothy's team work on and deliver once a month. So with that, Timothy, I want to say also thank you to our two sponsors in this with this short video.
Thank you, Maya.
Thank you.